The kingdom of Eldrath was a place where beauty was law, and the court's laughter could lift a person to glory or shatter them forever. Its towers of black stone stretched toward the sky, shrouded in mist and crowned with gleaming spires. The streets below were alive with the soft hum of merchants, scholars, and knights, all moving in careful order around the shadow of the royal castle. But within the grand halls, where golden chandeliers reflected the flicker of torchlight, the world was colder. Judgment here was swift, and mercy was rare. Era had lived her life in the shadow of these judgments. Her face, marked by a subtle disfigurement, had made her a target for whispers and cruel laughter. Even her closest neighbors avoided her gaze, unsure whether their pity or fear dictated their expressions. Yet Era did not hide. She moved with a quiet dignity, carrying herself like someone who understood that the world's cruelty could not touch her spirit, only the heart could choose to hurt her. On this day, the great hall of Eldrath was filled with nobles and potential suitors. The annual mating ceremony was a spectacle of glittering gowns, polished armor, and carefully rehearsed smiles. Families lined the sides of the hall, presenting their sons and daughters as jewels for the Alpha King's eyes. Whispers floated through the golden air. Too plain, too small, not enough fire in her eyes. And yet, Era walked in anyway, her head held high despite the sting of mockery. Her steps were measured, her pulse steady. She had prepared for this humiliation, yet nothing could truly ready her for the sharp edge of the court's ridicule. Children pointed. Noblewomen whispered behind fans. Even the musicians faltered, struck silent by the cruel spectacle of a girl the world had deemed unworthy. And then came the laughter, a sound so sharp it seemed to cut the air like a blade. Era's lips pressed into a thin line. She had expected this, but the sting did not dull. Every laugh, every pointed glance, reinforced the truth the kingdom had carved into her life. She was an outsider, a shadow in a world of light. And yet, she did not run. Instead, she let her eyes drift upward, seeking something beyond the court. Something no one could take from her. It was then that he entered. The Alpha King, Thalric, stepped into the hall, and the room seemed to hush under the weight of his presence. A ripple of awe swept through the court. Soldiers straightened, nobles whispered, and even the candles seemed to flicker more brightly. Thalric's reputation preceded him, ruthless in battle, unyielding in judgment, and feared by both allies and enemies alike. Yet there was a mystery in his eyes, a shadowed depth that few dared to meet. He stopped at the center of the hall, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. His eyes, sharp and commanding, fell on Era. For a moment, the laughter of the court seemed distant, irrelevant. There was no mockery in his gaze, no judgment, only recognition. "She's mine," Thalric said, his voice cutting through the murmurs like steel through silk. The hall froze. Gasps echoed, spilling over like water breaking a dam. Some nobles fell silent, unsure whether they had heard correctly. Others whispered, incredulous, their voices thick with disbelief. The Alpha King chose her? Era felt her stomach twist. Shock, fear, disbelief all collided in her chest. She had imagined many scenarios for this day, but none like this. She looked at Thalric, searching for jest, for trickery, for any hint that this declaration was a cruel joke. But his eyes held only certainty, and in them, a weight of intent she could not ignore. The court erupted in murmurs again, some in outrage, others in awe. The nobles closest to her frowned, their whispers sharp with disdain. Why would he? Surely he cannot mean her. It is a jest, too cruel. But Thalric did not speak further. He did not need to. His presence alone silenced the room, and Ira, trembling slightly, understood that the world had shifted beneath her feet. In that instant, she was no longer merely the mocked outcast. She was the woman the Alpha King had chosen. Era was escorted to the center of the hall, her steps careful, measured. She felt eyes upon her, heavy with curiosity, envy, and disbelief. She did not falter, though her heart beat a furious rhythm in her chest. Thalric remained beside her, silent and imposing, his hand close but not yet touching her. The space between them was charged with unspoken questions, an electric tension that both terrified and thrilled her. As the ceremony continued, Thalric's advisors attempted to intervene. "Your Majesty," one began. "Surely there must be some mistake. This girl, she is not." "She is exactly what I chose," Thalric interrupted, his voice calm but unyielding. "No more questions." The hall went quiet again. The noble's protest stifled beneath the authority of the Alpha King. Era felt a shiver of awe run through her. She had never been chosen. Not truly. Not for friendship. Not for love. Not for recognition. And yet, here she was, standing beside the most powerful man in the kingdom, his declaration echoing in her ears like a drumbeat of destiny. After the ceremony, she was escorted to the private chambers of Thalric's castle. The halls were dark, the shadows moving like living things along the walls. The air smelled of smoke and old stone, of magic lingering in places long forgotten. Era felt both fear and curiosity. She had known legends of the Alpha King, of his mastery over shadows and his unyielding will. Yet she also sensed something else, something unspoken, a depth of loneliness and burden that matched the weight in her own heart. Thalric stood at the window of the chamber, looking out over the kingdom. The moonlight cast a silver glow upon his face, highlighting the strength in his jaw, the sharpness of his eyes, and the quiet vulnerability he did not reveal to the world. "You are not what the world expects," he said, his voice low, almost thoughtful. "And that is why I chose you." Era swallowed hard. I do not understand," she whispered. "Why me? I am nothing here. Thanks for watching. And every there without some torty thin. That's in a fand." "You are everything," Thalric replied. "But you do not see it yet. The kingdom has judged you by appearances, by a fleeting idea of beauty and worth. But they are blind. And I am not." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Era felt a strange warmth in her chest, a flutter of hope mingled with fear. The man beside her, feared by all, had not mocked her. He had not demanded she change or shrink. He had merely recognized what others could not see, the strength and courage that had survived despite the world's cruelty. I am not ready for this," she said finally, her voice trembling. "You will be," Thalric said, turning to face her fully. His gaze was steady, unyielding, yet softer than she expected. "And when you are, the kingdom will see what I see. Until then, you have my protection." Era looked at him, unsure whether to trust, to fear, or to hope. The court's laughter still echoed in her mind, a reminder of the world she had always known. And yet, a spark had been lit, a spark that might grow into something she had never dared to imagine: belonging, acceptance, perhaps even love. That night, as she lay in the quiet of the chamber, Era thought of the court, the laughter, and the whispers. She thought of the Alpha King, and his eyes, so sharp and certain, and she understood that her life had changed forever. She was no longer merely a shadow, a figure to be mocked. She was chosen. She was seen, and the world, as cruel as it had been, would have to reckon with her presence. Outside the window, the moon traced silver paths across the castle walls. Shadows moved in the corners of the room, alive with the whispers of ancient power, and in the heart of the chamber, Era closed her eyes, feeling the weight of destiny pressing upon her shoulders, both terrifying and exhilarating. She did not yet know the trials ahead, the dangers that lurked in the shadows of the kingdom, or the power that slept within her. But she knew this. The Alpha King had chosen her. And no laughter, no mockery, no cruelty of the world could undo that. And somewhere, in the depths of the castle, unseen but watching, shadows whispered her name. Cliffhanger. Aira stirred in her bed, heart racing, as a sudden movement flickered across the room. A shadow, alive and almost human, slid along the walls. Was it the castle's magic? Or something far older? Something connected to the Alpha King's secrets, and to her own hidden destiny. The morning sun barely pierced the high towers of Thalric's castle, leaving the corridors in a half-light of gold and shadow. The castle itself seemed alive, breathing with whispered histories and unseen magic. Every stone, every carved archway, held centuries of secrets. Aira had spent the night tossing and turning in the chamber the servants had prepared for her. She had slept little, haunted by the strange shadow she had glimpsed at the edge of the room. Was it merely the castle's ancient magic, she wondered? Or was it something watching her, waiting for her to awaken fully into her destiny? She dressed slowly, her hands brushing against the folds of her gown, feeling the fabric heavier with the weight of expectation. Today, she would meet Thalric more fully, not just as the fearsome Alpha King who had declared her his, but as the man who might shape her life forever. The door to her chamber opened with a whisper, and a guard stepped aside. "The Alpha King awaits," he said, his voice formal but not unkind. Aira nodded and followed, her heart pounding in her chest. Every step through the shadowed halls made her acutely aware of the whispers of the castle, the soft sighs of stone, the faint rustle of magic in the air. She entered a vast hall, empty save for Thalric. He stood near the balcony, looking out over the kingdom. The sunlight caught his armor, making the edges gleam like sharpened silver. When he turned to look at her, his eyes were piercing, as though he could see through every layer she had built around herself. "You came," he said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made her stop in her tracks. I did," Aira replied, unsure if her voice sounded too small, too uncertain. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Do you understand what it means?" Thalric asked, stepping closer. "To be chosen by me?" Aira hesitated. Thalric smiled, though it was not a warm smile. It was a knowing one. "Few do, at first. To be seen in a world that refuses to see you, it changes you. It makes you stronger, if you let it. And it makes enemies, if you cannot." The word struck her like a sudden wind. She thought of the court yesterday, the laughter, the pointing, the cruel whispers. Could she be strong enough to face that world, with him beside her? Or would she break beneath the weight of attention, of power she had never sought? I am not sure I am worthy," she whispered, almost to herself. "You are worthy because you are yourself," Thalric replied, his voice unwavering. "The kingdom has judged you by what it sees on the surface. It does not matter. Only what lies beneath counts. And beneath, you are stronger than you know." Aira looked down, unsure whether to believe him. She had spent her life being told she was not enough, that she was ugly, weak, or unwanted. And yet, here stood the man who ruled the kingdom, declaring that she was chosen, that she was enough. It was more terrifying than any mockery she had ever faced. Thalric motioned for her to follow. "I will show you something," he said. They moved through winding corridors, past towering statues of past rulers, their faces stern and shadowed. They descended a spiral staircase carved from black stone, lit by faint torches that flickered as if alive. They emerged into a vast courtyard, the shadowed gardens, a place Aira had heard only in whispers. The garden was alive with strange flora, plants that shimmered with colors no mortal eye could name. Vines coiled like serpents. Flowers glowed softly in the dim light, and shadows moved among the trees, as though they had a life of their own. The air smelled of earth, rain, and something ancient, something powerful. "This garden is not meant for ordinary eyes," Thalric said, his voice low. "Here, grow the things the kingdom has forgotten, or feared. And here, you will learn to see what others cannot." Ira stepped carefully, her fingers brushing against petals that seemed to hum under her touch. She felt a strange energy, a pull deep within her, as if the garden recognized something in her. For the first time, she felt that she might belong somewhere beyond the judgment of others. "You feel it, do you not?" Thalric asked. "This power. It has always been yours, even if you could not see it." I feel something," Era admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. "But I do not understand it." "Ah, you will," Thalric said. "And when you do, you will see that your curse, if it can be called that, is not a weakness. It is a gift. The kingdom mocks what it cannot control, but you will learn to control it." Era's heart pounded. The idea that her disfigurement, the very thing that had made her an outcast, might be tied to hidden power, was both terrifying and thrilling. Could she truly accept that? Could she rise above the fear and shame that had shaped her entire life? Before she could respond, a sudden noise broke the moment, a rustling from the shadows of the garden. Era turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat. "Do not fear," Thalric said, stepping in front of her, his hand brushing lightly against hers. "Not all that moves in shadow seeks to harm. Some watch, some wait, and some test." The shadows seemed to shift, forming shapes almost human, almost alive, yet not. Era shivered, a mix of fear and wonder coursing through her. She could feel the garden's power pressing against her senses, teasing her with its mysteries. "You will have enemies," Thalric said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Not all will accept your place beside me. Not all will understand what I see, but you will not face them alone. You will have my guidance, my protection, if you are willing to accept it. Maybe be reader's eyes. Maybe be." End quote. Era swallowed hard. She had spent her life alone, protecting herself from mockery, cruelty, and the sharp edge of rejection. To have someone of Thalric's power and presence offer protection, no more than protection, recognition, was almost too much to imagine. I will try," she whispered. "I will try to understand. I will try to—" Thalric inclined his head, a faint, approving gesture. "That is all I ask. One step at a time. Era. One step at a time." They continued through the garden, and Era began to notice details she had never seen before. The shadows did not move as a single mass, but with intention, guiding her eyes to certain plants, certain stones. The air seemed thick with old magic, old promises, and old power waiting to be awakened. As they reached a secluded fountain at the center of the garden, Thalric stopped. The water shimmered, reflecting not the world above, but strange visions below its surface. Images danced Era's past, her fears, and glimpses of what might come. "You see yourself as the kingdom sees you," Thalric said softly. "Ugly, unchosen, weak. But that is only one reflection. Look deeper. See what is hidden." Era leaned over the water, her reflection trembling. She saw herself, yes, with all the scars, all the perceived flaws. And yet, beneath that, a glow pulsed faintly, subtle but undeniable. A power that had always been hers, waiting for recognition. I think I see it," she whispered, awe and fear mingling in her voice. "You do," Thalric said. "And soon, the world will see it too. But first, you must believe it yourself." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the soft hum of the garden filling the space between them. Era felt the weight of possibility pressing against her. Heavy, but exhilarating. And as she met Thalric's gaze once more, she realized that nothing would ever be the same again. But even in this moment of awakening, a shadow lingered at the edge of the garden, slender, dark, watching. Era felt it, a chill running down her spine. But when she looked, it vanished. Yet she could not shake the sense that this was only the beginning of a journey filled with trials, enemies, and challenges she had never imagined. Cliffhanger. As night fell over the castle, Era returned to her chamber, her mind spinning with the events of the day. Outside her window, shadows moved with a strange intelligence, whispering her name. And in the deepest darkness of the castle, unseen eyes observed her, and a voice murmured, "The Alpha has chosen, but will she survive the trials ahead?" Grode. I. The sun had barely risen over Eldrath when Thalric summoned Era to the castle courtyard. The air was crisp and carried the scent of pine from the forest that bordered the kingdom. Birds called from the trees, but their songs sounded faint and distant compared to the hum of the castle's magic. Era felt a mixture of anticipation and unease. Today, she would take her first steps into the trials. Thalric had promised trials that would test not only her courage but also the depth of her own spirit. Thalric stood waiting, his armor glinting in the early light. His expression was unreadable, as always, but his eyes softened slightly when they met hers. "Are you ready?" he asked. Era nodded, though her heart beat fast. "I think I am," she said, trying to convince herself as much as him. "The path will not be easy," Thalric warned. "You will face what frightens you most. You will confront shadows from your past and illusions that test your mind and heart. But remember this: I will be with you. Do not falter. Daughter Closer." The first trial led them into the haunted forest, a place whispered about in every corner of the kingdom. It was said that no one who entered unprepared could return the same. Trees twisted unnaturally, their blackened branches forming shapes like hands that seemed ready to grasp the unwary. The forest floor was soft with moss, yet it seemed to absorb sound, making each step echo in Ira's mind. "You must rely on more than sight," Thalric said as they entered. "Feel the forest. Sense its rhythm. Fear can cloud your judgment. Trust in yourself." Era swallowed hard. She had always been observant, noticing small details that others missed. But here, every sound and shadow seemed designed to confuse and frighten. Strange whispers floated through the air, voices calling her name, mocking her, or pleading for help. At first, she panicked. Her legs shook, and her breaths came fast. Yet Thalric's presence grounded her. His calm, steady aura reminded her to focus, to trust her instincts. Slowly, she began to notice patterns: the way the shadows moved, the way the whispers always came from directions where the trees formed gaps in the branches. "Good," Thalric said, noticing her composure growing. "You are learning." As they delved deeper, illusions began to appear. Era saw figures from her past, her parents, her childhood friends, and the nobles who had laughed at her. Each figure spoke harsh words, reminding her of her supposed flaws. Her reflection appeared in puddles on the forest floor, twisted and monstrous, amplifying the voice of the court that had mocked her. Era clenched her fists, forcing herself to breathe deeply. She remembered Thalric's words: "Fear can cloud your judgment. Trust yourself." Slowly, she looked past the twisted reflections and the mocking voices, focusing instead on the faint glow that emanated from within her, a warmth in her chest. A light that had always been hers, but had lain hidden under layers of doubt and fear. "You are stronger than you know," Thalric's voice echoed softly beside her. "The forest tests not your body, but your heart. If you falter here, you falter in life." Era steadied herself, and with a newfound resolve, she stepped forward. The shadows around her hesitated, then shifted aside, almost respectfully. She realized that the forest responded to courage, not fear. The second trial brought them to a frozen lake, its surface smooth and glassy like polished obsidian. Here, Thalric explained, illusions would take a different form: reflection and choice. Look into the lake, he instructed. The water shows not just what you are, but what you fear to be. Confront it, or it will consume you. Aira knelt by the water's edge. Her reflection stared back at her, distorted at first. She saw herself as she had always imagined: small, flawed, unworthy. But then the image shifted. She saw herself standing tall beside Thalric, strong, radiant. Her scars no longer signs of weakness, but symbols of resilience. Tears pricked her eyes. She had never allowed herself to see this version of herself not truly. The lake showed her that the power to transform her life had always been inside her, waiting for recognition. Thalric's hand brushed hers, grounding her. You see it now, he said softly. You are not what the kingdom judges you to be. You are what you choose to become. Aira nodded, feeling a surge of determination. The fear that had once gripped her chest loosened, replaced by courage she had never fully embraced. Their final trial took them to a cavern beneath the castle, lit by glowing crystals that pulsed with an inner light. Here, they faced the trial of trust and connection. A series of challenges appeared, forcing them to rely on one another. Aira had to navigate treacherous paths while Thalric provided guidance, but the paths were not straightforward. They twisted and changed, reflecting doubts and fears that arose between them. At one point, Aira misstepped, and a shadowed figure lunged toward her. Thalric reacted instantly, catching her hand and pulling her to safety. Their eyes met in that brief moment, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. Here, there was no court, no laughter, no judgment, only two souls learning to trust, to depend on each other, to acknowledge the growing bond between them. You saved me, Aira said, her voice trembling slightly. And you have saved yourself, Thalric replied. Courage alone is not enough. You must also trust those who care for you. Aira felt warmth bloom in her chest. She had always feared relying on others, believing that weakness would follow. But here, she realized that true strength included allowing others to stand beside her, to share the burden, to face the darkness together. As the cavern grew darker, a soft whisper echoed through the crystals. Aira's name, repeated in the wind, carried both warning and promise. She felt the pulse of the castle beneath her feet, alive with magic and power. Somewhere in the shadows, the same intelligence that had followed her before watched silently, waiting. Thalric guided her to the cavern's exit, where the first light of dusk filtered in. The kingdom stretched before them, bathed in a golden haze. Aira stood, her legs trembling from exhaustion but her spirit alight with accomplishment. She had faced fear, doubt, and illusion, and emerged stronger. Today you have learned something important, Thalric said, his voice quiet but firm. The kingdom will not change easily. The people may still judge, may still mock, may still fear what they do not understand. But you have the strength to rise above it. And together, we will change what they see. Aira looked at him, her heart swelling with a mix of awe and longing. She had expected only trials of strength and courage, but she found herself tested in ways she had never imagined, in trust, in connection, in understanding the hidden power within her. But even as she felt triumph, a shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. A dark shape, fleeting and silent, seemed to observe her from the trees beyond the cavern. Aira's breath caught. Something was waiting, watching. And it was no longer the court's mockery. It was something older, more patient, and far more dangerous. She turned to Thalric, seeking reassurance. Do you feel it? she asked, her voice low. He followed her gaze, frowning slightly. Yes, he admitted. And it is a sign. The trials have only begun. Others will come, forces that will challenge not just your courage, but your very heart. And some of these trials may not be as clear as the forest or the lake. Some will test the bond between us. Era swallowed, realizing that her journey with Thalric was far from over. She had faced illusions, confronted her fears, and begun to embrace her power. But the true challenge lay ahead. A world that would resist her place, and enemies that would seek to destroy what she and Thalric were building together. As night fell, the forest around them seemed to hum with quiet energy. Shadows moved with purpose. Whispers curled around the trees, and the air was thick with anticipation. Era felt a shiver of fear and excitement. She had come far, yet she knew the most difficult trials were still to come. Cliffhanger. As they returned to the castle, a messenger arrived with news that made Era's heart stop. The nobles of the court were gathering, plotting against her even now. And in the shadows of the castle walls, a figure stepped forward, unseen but powerful, murmuring a single word. She has been chosen, but the kingdom will not forgive it. The first light of dawn painted the towers of Eldrath in shades of gold and silver. But the kingdom still held whispers of fear and doubt. The nobles had gathered once more, their faces hard, their murmurs sharp, and their eyes filled with envy and suspicion. Era's presence at court no longer drew laughter, but cautious scrutiny. Every step she took was measured, every breath observed. Yet she moved with confidence now, her head held high, and a quiet strength radiating from her very being. Thalric walked beside her, his presence steady, protective, and commanding. He had trained her, guided her, and watched her awaken to the power within herself. He had seen her courage grow, seen her face fears that had once paralyzed her, and seen her embrace a destiny the kingdom had tried to deny her. Together, they had survived the trials of the forest, the illusions of the lake, and the cavern of shadows. But now, the ultimate test awaited, one that would determine whether the kingdom would accept her or continue to oppose the choice of its alpha king. The hall was quiet as Era entered. The nobles' whispers halted by the unmistakable weight of her presence. She was no longer the mocked outcast, the girl the court had scorned. She carried herself with authority and grace, and her eyes shone with a new light, one that spoke of strength, resilience, and undeniable power. Thalric stepped forward, raising his hand to command silence. "Today," he said, his voice resonating through the hall, "the kingdom will see what I have seen from the beginning. Strength and courage are not measured by appearances. True power lies within, and today it is recognized." The nobles stiffened, their envy and disbelief simmering beneath the surface. Some attempted to challenge him, to question his judgment. But Thalric's gaze cut through their protests like steel. "No one here can deny the truth," he said. "She has faced trials that would break most. She has embraced her destiny, and the power that comes with it. And now, she stands beside me, not as an outcast, but as the woman chosen to shape the future of Eldrath." Era felt her heart pound, her pulse echoing the rhythm of her own awakening. She had trained, she had faced fears, and she had grown. But this, the court, the scrutiny, the confrontation, was different. The world would not accept change easily. She had to prove that her strength was not just in magic or courage, but in her spirit, her mind, and her heart. Thalric motioned for her to step forward. She moved with calm determination, feeling the energy of the kingdom respond to her. The shadows seemed to bend toward her, alive with recognition, as if the castle itself acknowledged her claim. Era raised her hand, touching a crystal at her side, and a soft light spread through the hall, illuminating her and Thalric together. The light was not just a display of magic, it was a declaration of unity, of power, and of destiny fulfilled. The nobles gasped. Some took a step back, startled by the undeniable presence before them. Others attempted to speak, to challenge, but their voices faltered as the energy of the hall shifted. The court realized that Era was no longer a figure of mockery. She was formidable, a force that could not be ignored. One of the more arrogant nobles stepped forward, trying to break the tension. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Surely you cannot." Thalric's hand rose, and the shadows seemed to gather behind him, dark and powerful. The noble froze, silenced not just by the authority of the Alpha King, but by the quiet power emanating from Era. "You speak of what you do not understand," Thalric said. "She is as worthy as any of you, or more so. And the kingdom will see that truth today." Era felt a surge of courage. She had been timid, unsure, and afraid. But standing here, beside the Alpha King who had seen her worth, she realized that she was capable of much more than she had ever imagined. She stepped forward, raising her voice so that the entire hall could hear. "I am not the girl you mocked," she said. "I am not defined by your laughter, your whispers, or your shallow ideas of beauty. I am Era, and I have faced my fears. I have embraced my power, and I will not hide from what I am, nor from the destiny that has been given to me." A hush fell over the room. The court stared, some in shock, others in disbelief. But the energy that flowed from Era was undeniable. It was a presence forged through courage, patience, and trials that had tested every fiber of her being. Thalric stepped forward, placing his hand lightly on her shoulder. "She speaks the truth," he said, "and you would do well to remember it. The kingdom has long measured worth by appearances, but appearances are nothing. True strength, true greatness, lies within, and today, it is seen." The hall was silent for a long moment, the tension palpable. Then, slowly, whispers began to rise, not of mockery, but of awe. Eyes that had once looked down upon her now regarded her with respect, some even with admiration. Era felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet joy that came not from victory over others, but from recognition of her own strength. Yet, even as the court began to accept her presence, a shadow moved at the edge of the hall, dark, silent, watching. Era sensed it immediately, a subtle shift in the energy around her. Something older, more patient, and more dangerous than any noble's envy lurked in the corners. She tightened her grip on the crystal at her side, feeling the connection to the castle's ancient power hum beneath her fingers. Thalric noticed her change in posture. "You sense it," he said quietly. "Yes," Era replied. "Something is watching us. And it will test us again," he said. The tension in the hall reached its peak as the shadow stepped forward, revealing itself not as a being of flesh, but a specter of darkness, a creature born of forgotten magic and envy. Its eyes glowed with a cold light, and a low hum filled the hall, vibrating through the stone floors. The nobles gasped, some falling to their knees in fear. Era took a step forward, her heart steady despite the fear. She raised her hand, and the crystal glowed brighter. The specter hissed, recoiling slightly from the light. Thalric stepped beside her, the shadows gathering around him like loyal guardians. Together, they formed a circle of power and resolve, uniting their strength. "You will not harm this kingdom," Era said, her voice clear and unwavering. "You will not harm me, nor him, nor those who believe in what we protect." The specter lunged, but Era's light met it, a wave of energy that pushed back the darkness. The hall trembled as shadows collided, the air crackling with power. Thalric's voice joined hers, commanding, strong, and certain. Together, their power intertwined, A perfect harmony of courage, strength, and unity. The battle was swift, yet decisive. The specter shrieked and dissipated, leaving only a faint echo of its presence in the hall. The nobles stared in astonishment, witnessing firsthand the undeniable strength of Ira and Thalric. No one dared challenge her again. Ira lowered her hand, breathing deeply, feeling both exhaustion and exhilaration. Thalric placed his hand on her shoulder, a quiet gesture of approval and connection. "You have done well," he said. "You have faced what no one else could. And now, the kingdom must acknowledge what is true." For the first time, the court seemed to bow, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Era had transformed from the mocked outcast into a figure of power, respect, and undeniable presence. Her scars, her past, and her doubts no longer defined her. They had become the foundation of her strength. Thalric turned to her, his eyes softening. "You were never too ugly, too weak, or unworthy," he said. "The world was blind, but we are not. And now, we move forward together." Era smiled, a quiet, radiant expression. Not just by Thalric, but by the destiny that had shaped her journey, by the trials she had endured, and by the strength that had always been within her. As they left the hall, hand in hand, the sun rose fully over Eldrath, bathing the kingdom in light. Shadows still lingered in corners, still whispered in forgotten halls, but the balance had shifted. The Alpha King and the once mocked girl now stood united, their bond unbreakable, their strength undeniable. The kingdom would never forget the day the outcast was chosen, and the darkness that had once loomed over her was transformed into a source of power, courage, and hope. Cliffhanger, emotional close. Era looked up at Thalric, her eyes shining with trust and love. "I feared I was too broken to be loved," she whispered. Thalric smiled, holding her hand firmly. "You were never broken. Only the world was blind. And now, it will kneel before the truth of us." The castle hummed with magic, the kingdom stirred with anticipation, and the shadows that had once whispered doubt now whispered respect. Together, they stepped forward into a future forged by courage, love, and the unyielding strength of two hearts united against the darkness.